New explosions coming out of Crimea. It's being called a terrorist attack. It's shut down the Crimean bridge. So we definitely want to go through that. We also want to talk a little bit about what else is going on in the region. Scott Ritter, thank you so much for coming on today's show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you give my audience a little background? I know it's not even been 48 hours, but we have this terrorist attack that has happened on the bridge in Crimea. Can you give us a little bit of background, and then we'll discuss a little bit further what you think is going on with this attack?
Well, certainly. I think, first of all, we have to focus on Crimea itself. It's a point of some contention. Crimea is historically a Russian territory. In the 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev, who was at that time the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and himself an ethnic Ukrainian, gifted Crimea to Ukraine. There's various stories about why that happened. Some people say that it dealt with contractual complexities, meaning that entities that were in Ukraine who were trying to do business in Crimea, it just took too long for the contracts because one had to go through Moscow, the other through Kiev, and so to simplify this, they just simply made Crimea Kiev. Who knows? That's anecdotal, but the point is, the primarily ethnic Russian population of Crimea found itself in the Soviet Republic of Ukraine, which, given that the Soviet Union was run out of Moscow, wasn't the end of the world. But it became the end of the world for these people in 1991, 1992, when Ukraine became independent from the Soviet Union. And there began a long, decades-long gradual ramping up of animosity between the ethnic Russians of Crimea and the Ukrainian government, whom they believed treated them poorly because of their ethnic Russian status. There was also tension between Ukraine and Russia over the Sevastopol naval base. This is the key to Russia's security posture in the Black Sea. It's where the Black Sea Fleet is based out of. And so Russia, signed a leasing agreement with the Ukrainian government to keep the Russian fleet there and the Russian service members there. In 2014, there was a coup, a revolution, however you want to call it, in Kiev, where the pro-Russian government of Viktor Yanukovych was ousted by people who were aligned with Ukrainian nationalists, and they began to prosecute, some would say persecute, the ethnic Russians of Ukraine, including Crimea and the Donbass. Crimea declared its independence. Russian forces intervened, and within short order, Russia annexed Crimea into Russia. A move that has been rejected by the Ukrainians and by the West at large. Crimea is isolated from Russia, at least was at that time in 2014. And one of the things that the Ukrainians did is dam the canal that connects the Dnieper River with Crimea, a supply of fresh water that made Crimean agriculture and indeed made life in Crimea easier. They dammed it, cutting Crimea off from water, threatening to turn Crimea into a desert. And then it also isolated the people of Crimea. So Vladimir Putin ordered that a bridge be built. Now, people have been talking about building a bridge between Crimea and the Krasnodar region in southern Russia for some time now, but it's been deemed to be one of the more difficult engineering feats. Putin ordered it done, and it was done within a very short order. Russia built a very impressive bridge. I actually drove over it in May when I went to Crimea on my book tour. It's an impressive structure, and they creating connectivity now. So now there's a direct link between Crimea and Russia itself. This has been a sore point for the Ukrainians, made even more so after February of 2022, when Russia began its special military operation. One of the Ukrainian goals have been in this conflict to evict Russia from the territories that it has occupied, both in the Donbass but also Crimea. Um, the Ukrainians view the bridge as a legitimate military target, a strategic line of communication. Indeed, Russia does transit military equipment over this bridge. So, under the law of war, it's a legitimate military target. Ukraine has struck it twice. Now, the first time they struck it using the tools of terrorism. So one could have called this a terrorist attack. A car bomb driven by a civilian, witting or unwittingly, went off on the bridge. That is a terrorist act. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But this current act appears to be an act of done by the Ukrainian military, or at least special services, using a weapon that people can recognize as being military in nature. Russia has called this a terrorist act. The reason why is that Russia is not at war with Ukraine, and Ukraine has not declared war against Russia. People need to understand that. There's fighting going on, but from a legal structural standpoint, Russia is not at war with Ukraine. And so from the Russian perspective, this bridge, which connects Krasnodar region of Russia, which is a peaceful region, no martial law declared, part of Russia, with Crimea, is a civilian structure. And it was struck, 2 civilians died, and they call this a terrorist act. From the Ukrainian perspective, it's a legitimate military target. What's of significance here is that the Ukrainians, by attacking this bridge, may have pushed Russia to a point where it reconsiders its approach. As bad as things look in Ukraine towards the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian people need to understand this. Russia is not treating and has not treated Ukraine as a nation that it's at war yet, meaning that there's a lot of things that are allowed to continue to happen in Ukraine that would not happen if Russia was at war with Ukraine. And by attacking this bridge, the Ukrainians may have actually created some political impetus to push Russia over the edge and start considering actions that up until now it has not been willing to undertake, like dropping strategic bridges across the Dnieper River, dropping bridges and shutting down tunnels that connect Ukraine with Romania, with Hungary, with Poland. These critical infrastructure items, which under war would have been bombed on day one. I'm just telling you, as an American who participated in targeting Iraq during Desert Storm, I know that which of I speak. And if this was a conflict with the United States attacking Ukraine, all of these targets would have been dropped by now. Russia hasn't touched them, and it's greatly facilitated the Ukrainians' ability to transit NATO equipment across the border to the front lines. So from a military standpoint, it makes no sense why Russia has kept these bridges up, why Russia has allowed certain things to happen. But the reason is political, that Russia is not at war with Ukraine. So therefore, it is limiting that which it bombs to the immediate, the direct impact on the battlefield, not the overall impact on Ukraine. But this attack against the bridge may change that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I read this morning that this bridge is a big source of pride for Vladimir Putin. It
Yep.
was a big connector. They worked very quickly, as you said. It was an architectural feat. Do you think the attack on this is more of trying to shut down the region, or is this a televised attack on Putin's ego and something that he loves? What are your thoughts on that? And then let's go a little bit deeper on the actual attack.
I think it's both. I think that the Ukrainians are right now they have a counteroffensive that's not achieving its objectives. One of the purposes of the counteroffensive is to drive and disconnect the land bridge that's been created. Remember, this bridge, the Kerch Bridge, the Crimea Bridge, connects Crimea with southern Russia, with the Krasnodar region. And that was necessary because prior to the 2022 special military operation, there was no land bridge. You couldn't drive from Crimea to Russia without going through Ukraine. But because of the military operation, because of the annexation of Kherson and Zaporizhia, there's now a land bridge that connects Crimea with Russia. And so one of the goals of the Ukrainians in their counteroffensive was to sever this land bridge, either directly by punching through the Russian defenses and making physical contact with the Sea of Azov, or through fire by bringing the Ukrainian forces close enough to the highway that connects Crimea through Melitopol, Mariupol, and Russia, and put that under artillery fire. So you sever this line of communication. And that's critical for starving the Russian forces that are currently in the Kherson Zaporizhia area. The supplies that Russia brings for these forces comes from the land bridge, but also across the bridge, the Crimea bridge. And so you have a counteroffensive that hasn't succeeded in cutting the land bridge. So the feeling is if you could blow the real bridge, the Crimea bridge, you could begin the process of starving the Russians of the support that's necessary to continue the defense and enable the Ukrainians to launch through. So there's a legitimate military reasoning behind this. But as you also pointed out, this is one of Vladimir Putin's flagship projects. This was a very important project for him. It helped convince the people of Crimea that Russia wouldn't abandon them, and it helped the people of Russia to understand the risks, political risks that Putin took in bringing Crimea into the fold. While emotionally many Russians agree that Crimea is Russia and is forever Russia, the ramifications of absorbing Crimea, because remember, for 2 decades it had been under the rule of the Ukrainian government. The infrastructure had collapsed. It was not up to Russian standards, and by bringing in Crimea without a plan, there was no plan for this. It literally the coup took place in February, and by March the nationalists were threatening Ukraine, and by April Russia had taken Crimea, and by April Russia had taken it. And so now Russia has absorbed this territory with no plan. How do we proceed from here? They were thinking, how do we afford this? Where's the budget going to come from to bring Crimea up to Russian standards, which is an obligation now that it's part of Russia? And Putin was able to go around Russia and get different districts to adopt certain parts of Crimea and say, this is our responsibility. And so they would take their part of their budget and donate it to Crimea. So that was one thing. But in order to make that viable, you still needed to have, the economic connectivity. And that's what the bridge did. Putin, by building this bridge, sent a signal that he is committed to making Crimea part of Russia, that Russia should be committed. It was a bridge that united Russia with Crimea, and Vladimir Putin has his name written all over it. So, yeah, by attacking this is putting a thumb in the eye of Vladimir Putin and his project. So I think Ukrainians are accomplishing both objectives by attacking this bridge, and that's why the Russian response is going to be of an order of magnitude greater than it would be normally, because there's not just the military aspect of this attack, but there's the political aspect as well.
Okay. And just to be clear, it looks like this looks like something out of a Mission Impossible movie, but basically they took a remote controlled jet ski loaded with explosives and ran it into the bridge at about 3 a.m. Russian time. Is that your understanding?
Well, I don't know if they've actually identified. I mean, that's a weapon they've used in the past.
Okay.
But another weapon that they're talking about is a Remus 600 or something of that nature, which is an underwater drone that has some explosive capabilities. It could be a demining drone that you use to take in and you find a mine and you blow it up. And it was packed with even additional explosives, and that this was used. And what's interesting, if you use the Remus, because of its limited range, the Ukrainians would have had to have a commando team on board one of these ships that leaves Odessa with the grain. And that ship goes through what they call the Green Corridor, which is a safe corridor that the Russian Navy has stayed out of. And while it's going through the Green Corridor, the commandos would have gotten off the boat with this drone and then infiltrated closer to the bridge. The commandos would have been physically close enough to guide the drone to the bridge. So it's more like Mission Impossible than you can possibly think of. And that's that. But that's another reason why the Russian response will be the way it is, because from the Russians, this isn't just an attack; it's a betrayal. It shows that the Ukrainians have never operated in good faith about the grain deal. That the grain deal is always about empowering Ukraine to do things that otherwise wouldn't be permitted. And that's why I think you're seeing the harsh response by Russia over Odessa that we saw last night.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So people are saying Putin's not wasting any time getting revenge. He's already hit the port city of Odessa with a massive missile strike. Do you see that as the end of it, or do you think that was just already a planned attack, or is something bigger coming as far as a revenge attack for the explosion of this key piece of infrastructure, this bridge?
I think the Russians had a package already prepared. Look how quickly this was done.
Yeah.
So the Russians had a prepared package. They had systems identified. They had the targets identified. It was all wired in. So basically, the Russian leadership picked up the phone and said, fire Alpha Bravo 1001, a pre-planned fire mission against pre-designated targets. The question now becomes, why did Russia wait so long to do this? I mean, if these were targets that were known, why weren't they struck before? Why hadn't Russia taken these targets out prior to this? And the answer is that Russia was trying to operate in good faith about the grain deal, that they had basically said that Odessa is going to be fundamentally off limits, and Russia was living up to its obligation. This is a signal now that Russia's done with the grain deal, that they're going to start to view Odessa as a target. I don't think that this represents the end of the targeting. I think that there are other targets that have yet to be developed. For instance, those who planned this attack, those who carried out this attack. Russia is going to have to be more specific about who they were, and then Russia is going to find them and bring death and destruction upon them. I also think that Odessa's days of sleep-filled nights are over. I think you're going to see Russia seeking to make sure that Odessa cannot be used as a platform to continue attacks. The drone attacks are not only prepared and planned from Odessa, but for instance, last night there was a drone attack, the sea drone. There was an air drone attack. 32 airborne drones were launched by Ukraine from bases around Odessa against Crimea. All 32 drones were shot down. But from the Russian perspective, Odessa has become a launching pad of attacks against Crimea. And I think you're going to see Russia seeking to apply military solution to that problem, to eliminate Odessa as a source of continued military attacks against Crimea.
Okay. Now, is this an eye for an eye attack where it's like, hey, you're hitting our coastal town with access to the Black Sea, so now we're hitting you? Or do you think that they've been holding back, like you mentioned, till the grain thing was off? Or do you think because of the prior bridge attack that they've just been waiting, hey, if they hit us again, we're gonna let them know that was a bad move? It, like you say, it does seem pre-calculated, and they were prepared. Otherwise, they couldn't have launched this as quickly as they did.
I don't think it's an eye for an eye. I don't think Russia plays the eye for an eye game. Russia's intent is to prevail in this conflict, and so they will hit the targets necessary to achieve their military and political objectives. I do believe that in the aftermath of the first attack against the bridge, that Russia prepared a pre-planned counterstrike that's updated continuously. That one of the jobs of the Russian intelligence officers, people who would, like myself, would have been to look over Odessa and say, okay, oh, look, they just put more fuel here. Let's upgrade that target. Let's make sure we have a cruise missile designated for that. Oh, look, they did this, they did that, they did this. And you build the target deck. You can say, oh, they're no longer doing this here. Let's take that off the target deck. And you keep the target deck updated so that it's relevant. And in doing so, you always allocate a weapon system to it. And so they had the pre-planned mission already in place, and that was done. But it's not an eye for an eye. I think it was definitely retaliation for the attack, but I also believe that there will be continued retaliation. I think that Russia um, is not going to be in the business of attacking, stopping, letting them attack the bridge again, attacking, stopping, letting them attack the bridge again. I think Russia's in the business of they're never going to attack the bridge again. And so they're going to do whatever it takes to prevent a repeat of what just happened.
Okay, sounds like you and I will be talking about Odessa here in the future. Well, one more question, then I want to switch gears with the interview. I've been reading, I don't know if you've seen or heard anything, but out of British media, I've been reading that some of these new shadow missiles that can go upwards of 600 miles an hour that were given to Ukraine by the United Kingdom could be used as future attacks to destroy the Crimea bridge, more than just damage it, one side of the highway there, to take it out. Have you heard anything like that, or is this just war propaganda coming out of England?
Well, my understanding is that they've already tried that.
Okay.
That Storm Shadow missiles have been fired at the Crimea bridge, but that Russian air defense has been effective in shooting them down and preventing them from reaching their target. But there's no doubt that the Storm Shadow missile has the capability of striking the bridge, and if it hits the bridge in the right place, could drop the bridge. So I think you're going to see the Ukrainians attempt to launch these missiles against the bridge in the future. They're going to, I think it's a strategic goal and objective of Ukraine to drop the Crimea bridge, and they're going to continue to do so long as this conflict is ongoing. As you said, I think you and I are going to be talking about this for some time yet. This is not the final chapter in this saga.
Yeah, if Russia's air defense is successfully taking out even the shadow missiles, this could be the reason why the bridge was attacked either by a drone or an underwater drone or a remote controlled Sea-Doo loaded with explosives, because it would be able to get past those air defense systems.